The interior space of the BMW X5. Now, I've been in multiple trim levels, so I can talk about some of the features that are gimmicks that you don't want and some of the things that are great. So let's talk about the basics first. Like every modern BMW, they have a great understanding that everything should be physical controls for the things you use and interact with every day. HVAC controls, all physical. There's a small display above it, so you never have to interact with the infotainment. But the infotainment acts as an augmentation of all of those controls. If it's cold out, you can set a threshold. At like below 50 degrees, you can set it to automatically turn on the air conditioning or heating or the seat heaters. That's smart, something that you can't really do with physical control, so you have that. This car specifically has the heated and cooled cup holder feature, which, might be a little gimmicky, but I have found one specific value for it. If you have a cup with ice and you want to keep it colder longer from a drive-through, you got it. If you have baby bottles you need to warm or you need to keep it warmer, you can put it in there and turn the heater on. So it is functional. How long it lasts is a total different story because, you have liquids here by the USB port, the 12-volt connector and all that stuff. So just keep an eye on where you're spilling stuff. Most everything works in here very simply. You can get into any car and into this BMW and know how to work it. The only area that I don't like is where the shifter is. There's too many knobs, buttons, and switches here. It's kind of a cluster. Like literally, I've had a hard time driving this, and I even know it, figuring out where my drive mode buttons are, the auto stop start, the hill descent control, and even all the infotainment controls here. If I have to push like media, I'm constantly looking down, and it's annoying. Your center gauge cluster is pretty good. It's stuff that we've seen on most BMWs now. I don't like how the tachometer's reversed, but one thing that I found that I used is minimal mode, which basically just tells you nothing. It just tells you your speed, and that's kind of it, what gear you're in. And I like that at night because there's not as much brightness, and I can turn off the infotainment screen. So like when I'm inundated with data and constant information, I like that you can consolidate it down to basically nothing and use the HUD for everything else. So BMW is great about technology implementation, whether you like it or not. But everything else is basically what you would expect to see. Now, the interior lighting package, that this has the executive package, and it has the lit moonroof, which means there's little pickup points or little metal pickup points. So when the LEDs shine from the side, the roof lights up with the color of the interior that you've chosen, the LED color. And BMW does a great job with interior lighting. It makes it feel like a much more special place. And I like it. It's a gimmick, but I think a lot of people that are going to buy this are going to think it's cool. Now, of course, you can choose interior color and all that. The back seats are very, very comfortable. This is a 2-row SUV crossover. It's super, super comfortable in the front and in the back. The only thing that I'm really going to complain about here is the Harman Kardon audio system. It is barely average for a vehicle at this price point. At $97,000, I feel like the Bowers & Wilkins should be standard. Like basically anything over $90,000, you should have a premium audio system in a vehicle like this. And the problem is the Bowers is like ridiculously expensive. And that's one of the lowlights of this. It's such a great vehicle overall that the standard Harman system is just so disappointing. And I put the audio chart here so you can see it. You're looking at the BMW X5 on the Benpack lift. What this is built on is BMW's CLAR Global architecture, which means it is front engine, rear wheel drive, and then they can tack on all-wheel drive to it. But it always has that rear bias. It also is built to have a near perfect 50-50 weight distribution. Now, if you just choose to get the turbo inline 6, it's going to have better balance than if you get the V8, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But what you're going to see underneath here when you get to the X5, the 5 Series and 7 Series is you get more of a double wishbone, although this is more consistent with a multi-link, but the same foundation as a double wishbone suspension. You have 2 lower control arms that are all aluminum, forged aluminum on the lower half, and it goes to a upper A arm with a single ball joint. This is a massive assembly, including a huge aluminum knuckle. Now this has a stamped steel subframe, but everything is covered up underneath here. It's typical what you're seeing on every single modern car. This is all to reduce NVH, to reduce road noise, and all the good things that you want from a luxury car is more isolation. Now, I'm going to move on to the back and talk about the rear. In the rear of the X5, you're going to start to see some more cost added here. You have this really beautiful looking aluminum subframe carrier that attaches to all stamped steel control arms. And this is something that BMW does to kind of cut cost. It doesn't need all aluminum control arms. They save that for the M products. But what you do get on pretty much every X5 is adaptive dampers, and they don't really market it. It's always changing on the fly, rebounding compression, and it can be tied to the drive modes, although you don't particularly notice it when driving this. Now, if you go to the M line, you get M tuning of the suspension and dampers, spring rates, all of that. And then there's also an air ride option, which we had on the V8 version of the car, and it's a little bit softer. But it's, again, the suspension differences between all these models is more performance related versus comfort related. But there's more bracing. You can see these aluminum cross braces, which connects the rear half of the subframe to the control arm to the rear bulkhead towards the back half of the car. But that's really about it with the underbody of the X5. Let's get this on the road and take it for a drive. Setting off in the X5 M50i. Let's just launch this right off the line. Oh! That is just preposterous. It's so ridiculous how fast this is. And I'm not kidding. I thought the inline 6 version of this was quick, and then you get into the twin turbo V8 and you're like, it has such a high wow factor. That is until you look at the price tag on this. $97,000. This doesn't even have seat coolers or seat massagers in it. That's right. And I mean, you know, I know why you're buying this. One, you're buying it for the badge. Two, it's one of the few vehicles you can get an insane V8 in. And then it balances all like the dynamics, the driving dynamics that most cars don't. You have 50-50 weight distribution. Well, not so much in the V8, but 50-50 cross balance. That means this handles like more of a sports sedan. The transmission is ultra fast. There's no delays in downshifting. There's no, well, am I gonna wait or is it gonna upshift for me? Nope. It basically allows you full driver control, and that is why you're paying almost $40,000 more for an SUV from a value brand. Other than that, I mean, if you're not into driving, you don't care about a V8, you don't care about a great transmission and a pretty decent ride, well, there's better values out there for you. And because this is a rear-wheel drive architecture first, with all-wheel drive added on, there's some things that it can do. That means it can send power to the rear wheels, and it sends it to the rear wheels first, and then adds the front-wheel drive aspect into it after to kind of get you stabilized. So when you turn, look at that. I mean, I literally could almost lose control of this with the traction and stability control off, and that is a huge bonus if you want a car or an SUV that has to be your everything. You got to haul the family around, you got to tow a Ski-Doo or a lawnmower, you know, and you got to take business calls. I don't want to take business calls right now. Decline that. So that's what this is. It's going to do everything, and it's going to cost you a boatload to do everything, including the fuel economy penalty for having the V8, which is, I'm getting around 12 miles to the gallon. If you go for the inline 6 version, what you're gonna get is, if you're driving it like a normal person, maybe 26 to 27 miles per gallon. Speaking of which, handling, ride quality. Well, the adaptive suspension on this thing works, and I'm not kidding you, it does a great job. braking's confidence inspiring. It doesn't feel synthetic. The amount of force that you apply to the brake pedal adds up to what the car is doing. It doesn't have this, oh, breathe on the brakes and you slam your head forward. You apply as much force with your foot and it just feels very natural. Even the steering, it's heavier than the non-M performance version of this. It gives it more weight, more heft to it. And even in kind of like the lower settings, the comfort modes, it feels very, very natural. Every single input about this, and again, this is why you're spending this much money. Let's launch it again. Why not? Oh! One of the reasons why I did this in the wet is because this is one of the biggest pros of this and having BMW's all-wheel drive setup. You never, ever have a problem getting off the line. You will literally obliterate everything on the road in any snowy or wet condition. It is amazing. And you know, I'm thinking, well, I would prefer a rear-wheel drive sedan. You cannot do that in that. In something like that. You can do it in here. Every single time you can mash the throttle. Yeah! And have a lot of fun doing so, and you never feel a loss of traction. Now, obviously, when you're turning, you know, you're limited by tires like every other car. The all-wheel drive system is going to transfer power front to back, try to straighten you out, and stability control will kick in. But getting off the line, I would say the only other SUV I've been in that was kind of like this is the Trackhawk. And obviously, this doesn't sound nearly as good as that, but you have about as much usable power, and it's definitely a big wow factor. If you don't care about power and you don't care about that, just get the inline six because that's plenty quick. And I've spent a lot of time in both of them, and I'm really, really impressed with this overall. But let's get to the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the BMW X5. I've spent time in pretty much every trim level, and we utilize the X5 as our camera car for a lot of our lead follows, so that should tell you something. But what it's not going to tell you is the good and the bad of this. So here it is. The biggest and the strongest part of the X5, or BMWs in general, is their architecture, the weight distribution, the thought in terms of physical, mechanical design to make this feel like a sports car. All these X5s have this feeling that you can tackle any road. They're insanely fast. The Turbo 6 and the V8 is even more nutty. It's way more horsepower than you can ever imagine. The drivetrains are great. The transmission, the 8-speed ZF, it's programmed it feels like what an old dual clutch felt like. It's that quick, but it has the refinement and smoothness of modern torque converted automatics. You're really buying the BMW brand. Well, some people just buy it for the badge, but the drivetrains are great. The interior blends the digital realm and the physical realm better than most manufacturers do. They know exactly what to keep for physical knobs, buttons, and switches, and then what to put on a touchscreen or the instrument cluster. That's a great thing. The way that they do interior ambient lighting gives it a very sleek, modern, futuristic feel without being overly gimmicky. And overall, the interior build quality is pretty decent, although there's some things that are very generic for the price. That gets me into some of the negatives. And the big one mechanically is it doesn't matter what trim level you choose, whether you get Air Ride, the base, or the M Sport suspension, they all feel way too firm for me. Personally, I feel like an SUV should be supple over every pavement type, and the X5 just feels very firm all the time. If that's what you like that instantaneous response from an SUV, you're gonna love the X5. But if you want something softer, this is not it. The second negative part is the cost. This is not a value brand, but at $90,000+, it doesn't even come with cooled seats, and I talked about that. They nickel and dime you for a lot of these features. Thank God you're no longer paying for Apple CarPlay as a subscription, so they got smart there, but I feel like a lot of this stuff should be baked in, including the more premium audio system. The Harman Kardon is just too average for what this car is. But again, BMW, they do certain things better than anybody else except maybe Porsche from a performance perspective. It's one of those, again, you got to get in it. You got to compare it to the competitors, the other German competitors, and even like Volvo to see if this is going to do it for you. But again, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.